Welcome to School and Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds, featuring prominent leaders, subject matter experts, and thought innovators with their perspectives on the current challenges facing K-12 education. I am your host, Larissa Napolitan, a former teacher, instructional coach, and a member of the Branching Minds team, here to lead conversations and to shine a light on phenomenal educators and those that are on a mission to transform our schools and the lives of students. I am excited to share that we have launched our 2024 listener survey, and we can't wait to hear from you. All you have to do is simply click the link in the show notes, answer a few questions, and you'll be entered into our end of year giveaway. Your insights are invaluable as we plan episodes for 2025, ensuring that we continue to deliver great MTSS content and engaging guests. Now for today's episode. To kick off the new year, I am excited to share with you a conversation with a group of educators that are in the field leading the MTSS work in their district. This conversation is full of nuggets, insight, and advice and lessons learned. Katya Henderson, our Director of Customer Success here at Branching Minds, is here to ask these educators about the reality of their MTSS work. Katya, I'm going to pass the mic to you. Take it away.
Awesome. We all know full well the potential impact of MTSS is transformational, but achieving its goals with fidelity often involves overcoming substantial challenges that many of us here today are facing or have faced in the past. These include, building buy-in across stakeholders, resource limitations, consistent and effective data utilization, inequitable identification of support, sustained professional development. The list can go on and on and on. There's many challenges, but despite these obstacles, our three distinguished speakers today have led their districts through these challenges with creativity, determination, and a deep commitment, above all, to student success. We're going to hear today from Emma McBride. She is an MTSS specialist in Beaumont ISD. We're going to hear from Angie Pluge, a director of learning at Waverly School District 145 in Nebraska. And we're going to hear from Shannon Thornton, a director of curriculum, instruction, and assessment at Warrensville Heights, CSD, Ohio. So I'm going to give each of them a few minutes to introduce themselves and share a little bit about their unique journey. Welcome, Emma.
Thank you. I appreciate that introduction. I am the MTSS specialist for Beaumont ISD. There are two district level specialists here. We do have quite an old district, founded in 1883. We take up a large area in our county, and we have 29 campuses with over 16,000 students. So we have a very large population of staff and students. We have a high minority enrollment, and we have a high economically disadvantaged enrollment as well. And we're in our second year of implementation, really the first year with educators on campus. So I'm happy to be here today and share what I know.
Thanks, Emma. Thank you so much. We're happy you're here. You're getting shout outs for Texas in the chat. Angie, tell us a little bit about your journey.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Angie Pluggy. This is my 25th year as a public educator. My MTSS journey started in 2005. I was a Title I middle school administrator in a large urban district in Lincoln, Nebraska. We had a lot of students who needed additional support both inside and outside the classroom, and we just didn't have enough time, energy, or resources to meet all their needs with individual plans. So we invested in an early warning system and while investing in core. 6 years ago, I moved to a mid-sized rural district outside of Lincoln, Nebraska. My role changed from implementing MTSS systems to supporting and facilitating schools and developing their own. As a district leader, I see my job as creating coherence and simplicity, or trying to simplify MTSS. And the heart of that is our shared definition of MTSS. In District 145, we define MTSS as monitoring the effectiveness of core instruction and identifying students who need additional support. A big game changer that has really contributed to our exponential growth in student achievement and literacy is when we changed our mindset about additional support. We really are careful about recognizing that additional support is providing targeted skill instruction, not just more core. And students who are getting targeted skill instruction, they also need additional support during core. So we're really strategic about our instruction and providing that additional support during that core instruction.
Angie, thank you so much. I want to dig into some of these in a little bit with you and ask you some more questions. But Shannon, we'll throw it over to you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you.
My name is Shannon Thornton. I'm the Director of Curriculum, Instruction, and Assessment for Warrensville Heights City School District in Ohio. It's right outside of Cleveland. We are a small school district. We have about 2,000 students now. Our enrollment has been steadily increasing. Last year, we had 1,856 students. We are predominantly an African-American district with 93.6% of our students being African-American. 100% of our students are economically disadvantaged. 21% students with disabilities, 37% chronic absenteeism rate, and a 96.9% graduation rate. Our district was the first district ever in Ohio to avoid state takeover, moving from an F to a C on the state report card in 2019, right before the pandemic. I came on after the pandemic on 2021 as the Director of Scholar Intervention and Data, and helped to springboard our MTS system in the district. And we're very proud. Last school year, we were overall 3.5 star district out of 5 in the state of Ohio, and our high school is a 4-star district out of 5 in the state of Ohio. We contribute a lot of our success to our focus on the science of literacy, the science of reading, and our focus on literacy, and also our MTSS systems throughout our district.
Impressive. Thank you so much, Shannon. Shannon, we're going to stay with you for a little bit. Tell us a little bit about some challenges in the teacher space. This is, something that will resonate with a lot of our friends here. What are some challenges teachers face in integrating MTSS in their regular workflow?
That's a great question. So like I said, I've been in this current position for only about 6 months. The last 3 years in the district, I spent as the Scholar Intervention Director, and trying to implement an MTSS system in our district, working with teachers alongside teachers and building principals. The number one issue is always time. When do I have the time to implement all of these different tiers? So we had to work through those issues by embedding time within our schedule. The other is materials. What do I use? When you have the time, then what do I use to provide these interventions? So we spent a lot of time in our district purchasing. We were able to get a grant from the state, and that allowed us to purchase a lot of the materials, making sure those materials were high quality instructional materials. Ohio has a list of state approved intervention programs we can only use. So making sure that we have those programs in our buildings, aligning our assessments and our diagnostics was a challenge, is making sure we're using the right assessments, we're using the right diagnostics. And then also a challenge was making sure that everybody in the district knew how to read those assessment and diagnostic results and knew what to do after they got those results. Challenge is progress monitoring. So you have to do the intervention and then you have to monitor the progress of the intervention. So that is another challenge of when do we have the time to do that? How often do we do that? And then the hard part is to making adjustments to the child's intervention plan. So that's where we are now in our journey, is now that we have all these challenges, how do I make adjustments? How do I know when Johnny has mastered whatever skill we were intervening, and he's ready to move on to that next thing, whatever that next thing is, and what does the diagnostic say is that next thing, and knowing how to be fluid with that and not just being so rigid where you have to wait exactly 8 weeks and then they move. Learning doesn't happen like that. Uh, so all those things were challenges for teachers.
Yeah, absolutely. And tell us a little bit, can we dig a little bit into how you have maybe pick a couple of these, addressed some of these concerns and supported teachers while they're implementing MTSS?
I think one thing, if there's any administrators listening or building principals, district people, embedding time into the schedule is huge. As I said, if you want to start anywhere, making sure you have dedicated time for teachers that's outside of core instruction to provide interventions. In our elementary school, we have an hour, grades K through 4, and fifth grade, 1 hour, um, 90 minutes on Fridays. It's embedded into the schedule. It's called no new instruction. So that way the time is not an issue. Another thing we do is we make sure that we have a testing team. We use some of our ESSER dollars for human capital. So we made sure we hired certified teachers. So we have certified teachers who we call our SWAT team. So they do a lot of our testing. So that helps with the progress monitoring. We use Acadians, and that's one-on-one, human and human. So you have people to provide interventions, to do the progress monitoring, and do the testing. That frees up that teacher's time to actually teach and take away that work off of their plate.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much, Shannon. That's real world examples of how you're making it happen. Thank you for sharing. Let's talk a little bit about student-centered support plans. Angie, I'm going to ask you to share with us here. How do you ensure that each student's support plan is tailored and reviewed regularly, especially with, I think this is going to be a theme, it already has been today, limited time and resources.
Yes, and Shannon, you really set it up great because you talked about all the things that you need to be able to deliver a plan. And so, as I said in my introduction, I feel a big part of my role is to create that coherence and to simplify the process. And so there are 4 things that we've done to really try to create coherence with our student planning. So the first is the plan components. So all of our tier 2 interventions, whether it's academics, behavior, or attendance, we have it's a Google spreadsheet or a Google sheet where we identify what the components are going to be. So that starts with the goal. And then we worked with Branching Minds to where we have a reasonable amount of goals and it's in a pull down menu. So when you go in and like Shannon talked about, the student has flagged on this assessment, we know this is the goal that goes with that flagged assessment. And that's already in a pull down. So we've got a consistent set of goals. The second thing that we do is we write those goals for an entire semester. Shannon, you alluded to this, that you do have to have flexibility within that semester. We don't want students working on the same goal. What we found though is that just that process of closing out a goal and rewriting it, that's a lot of steps. So we write our goals for an entire semester, but we identify sub goals. So those sub skills that connect with those diagnostic assessments. So for example, I might flag in phonics, but my sub skills are going to be those specific sound spelling patterns. And we just write that in the notes section of our attendance. Every week, the intervention is writing what that looks like. So then we don't have to go through the whole rewriting process. The third thing is the interventions are very specific. So similar to what Shannon said, we have 1 or 2 interventions that are connected to the goal. And so those are part of our intervention library. Those are selected. We also have identified what the progress monitoring measure is that's connected to that goal. And here I think was the most important part. Our our actual goals are connected to benchmark norms. And that's all filled out. So I know if I'm in this grade level, this is the benchmark goal that we're working towards. And that matters because we're not guessing. We're not guessing what we want that student's goal to be. We're setting a high goal, a benchmark, and teachers trust that goal. So because it's connected to the norm data, they trust that. So we have that set up for every single tier 2 or 3 plan. The second thing we do to keep this coherence and streamlined is we define roles. Everybody, classroom teachers and interventionists, they're at those meetings where we're reviewing our data and we're setting those goals. We use that goal intervention sheet to build that out, but only our interventionists are in Branching Minds writing those goals. We don't have a million different people writing the goals. It's just our interventionists. And then our classroom teachers send out that template or that communication to the parents. So parents are hearing from classroom teachers. The third thing we do is we're really clear on who's progress monitoring and who's entering that data. And so whoever is completing the progress monitoring is entering the progress monitoring data into Branching Minds. And then finally, the fourth thing that we've done, which addresses what Shannon was talking about when she was saying, how do we know when we're going to switch a goal or how we're doing? We schedule monthly reading plan or monthly, if it's behavior, check-ins. And this is that time. So we build in common collaborative time for everybody, and we gradually release that. I modeled it for an entire year, but we have an agenda where teachers are going in and they're checking that rate of improvement to see, are students making progress? Are they on trend to meet their goal? So teachers' role is to go in and look at all their individual students, while the interventionist and the principal are at the table and they're collecting data to look at intervention effectiveness. At those meetings, that's when we might revise the sub-skill goal. And at those meetings, it's also an opportunity to talk about how are we providing additional support for this group of students during core instruction time as well.
Keeping time in mind. I love it. I heard that theme is how do you maximize your everything with time and limited time and resources. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's going to be really helpful for people. Let's talk about your intervention resources. Can you share, Angie, we'll stay with you. What intervention resources have you found most helpful?
So we turn off the intervention library. I'm just going to say. And the reason why we turn off the intervention library is we have just found when there are too many interventions, it often leads to either paralysis or intervention jumping. And so we, as part of our whatever the MTSS area of focus is, we identify one main intervention, possibly two, that are connected to the goal. And so it's that skill area or goal. And we believe that limiting those number of interventions. So for example, with literacy, we use UFly, we use Hegarty, we use repeated readings. Those are all part of the Branching Minds intervention library. We also, though, we created our own. So we use CKLA and we have a CKLA plus intervention. And so we just created that, and you can do that in Branching Minds. We use a focused number of interventions because it allows us to really effectively support the implementation as well. So we can provide professional learning to a small, reasonable number of interventions, and we can monitor that impact. We only select evidence-based interventions, and we're monitoring the impact of those interventions through our monthly check-in meetings. So those check-in meetings, we build in that time And we're able to look at individual students, but we're also able to look across those interventions as a whole and by grade level. And because we have that focused number of interventions, again, we're able to provide more targeted support and professional learning to those specific interventions. The other thing that I think is really unique, maybe to us or in the people we collaborate with, is for fidelity checks. Every school comes up with their own process for that, and our teams have become really creative. They use a lot of instructional rounds to do fidelity checks, so it's not just an administrator doing it. It's other teachers looking and doing that fidelity check, and they learn a lot from watching each other implement the intervention. And then we've also done some video reflection where they videotape themselves and then they watch themselves implementing that intervention.
Can you go back? You mentioned in your monthly meetings, you do look at the impact that each intervention is having, and you're using evidence-based. Can you touch a little bit about how you make sure that the interventions, how do you gauge the impact of each intervention?
We use the rate of improvement. So that is probably one of my favorite features. And I really think that has created that concrete signal to teachers of, one, is my student trending to actually meet the benchmark, the next benchmark? Or sometimes students are improving, right? But they're not trending to meet that benchmark. So what we do is our teachers go in and they're individually looking, even if they have a student who's receiving an intervention from a different interventionist, they're still looking at how their students are doing individually. And then our interventionists and our principals are using that rate of improvement. And so we're calculating the percentage of students that, again, are trending to meet the goal, trending positively, but maybe not going to meet. And then those that are just, they're not going to meet. And so it's rate of improvement.
Thank you so much, Angie. We hear that quite a bit, is how do I make sure the interventions we're using are effective? What systems can we set up? So that's really helpful, I think, for people to hear. Thank you for sharing. Shannon, can I pick on you once again? You talked a little bit already about the challenges that teachers are facing, and you touched a little bit on time management. Can we dig into that a little bit? Tell us how you help teachers set priorities as they're working with students. What is absolutely essential for implementation fidelity, and what can be set aside if needed? How do you help them understand that?
So one thing we do have is we have a decision-making framework, and I think that helps a lot. Angie kind of hit on it a little bit too when she was talking, is we have a framework that was designed by our literacy specialists, and it lets teachers know if a child diagnostic says they're here, then you use this material and you do this. So that really helps, like when we're talking about the intervention library. We have very specific things you do for specific students. So you stick to that decision making framework. And then another thing is just to make sure you monitor. I heard a lot about monitoring. I love a lot of what Angie is doing. We say in Warrensville, you have to inspect what you expect. So I would definitely say spending time monitoring what is going on. We like to talk a lot about our success in Warrensville, but one of our struggles is we were doing the work. We knew we were doing everything. We went to all the literacy conferences and we were like, check, check, check. We're doing these things. Why aren't we getting the results? And what it came down to is we have to monitor the effectiveness of our interventions. So that's one thing that you cannot skip, is you have to have those meetings. So we started implementing this last year where we met with each teacher, interventionist one-on-one. They went over their caseload kid by kid. We had our literacy specialist there. We had our data coach there. We had the building principal there. We looked at the whole child. So that Branching Minds was valuable in that we were able to look at everything in one place. And then we also looked at behavior incidents in Branching Minds as well. But going back to the initial question is really monitoring the effectiveness of the intervention. You cannot skip on that. You cannot skip on looking and reading the diagnostics carefully, and then streamlining what you're using as an intervention. Those are the three things that you just cannot shy away from or avoid.
Thanks, Shannon. Can you all share, anybody, any successful interventions for students that blatantly do not care about attendance? Anything that's been working for you all for attendance?
I think one thing we did was in the one-on-one meetings. Like I said, we looked at attendance, which is different, and that's where it's MTSS. So if we realized that a child's intervention, they weren't meeting or trending upwards, we looked at behavior and we looked at attendance. We sent a letter home to parents, and they were already getting the letter about the child's attendance or chronic absenteeism from the attendance liaison, but to tie it and link it in with academics. And that really hit home. And then we also had our principal make personalized phone calls to parents about that. So we tied those two together. It's difficult. I think we all deal with issues with chronic absenteeism across the nation. It's very challenging, but just sending those letters home and pairing it with, we need your child here. And this is part of the reason why they are not having success. That's something we did in Lawrenceville.
Thank you, Shannon. Anybody else want to touch on that?
And just really quick, we have found, I mean, and it's not successful for everybody, but having collaborative planning meetings, and really we pulled attendance out of core and had a group of practitioners that social worker, counselor, school nurse, administrators. We found that more of our attendance issues were outside of school things. And then having those collaborative plan meetings to really get at some of the root causes, and having all those service providers at the table with parents was helpful at times, because there were things that weren't inside school related that we were able to address through collaborative planning with families.
Awesome. All right, Emma, I'm going to turn it over to you. If talking a little bit about professional development, it's also one of the common challenges is that sustained professional development and making sure our staff and our teachers know, the how to implement, what to do, who, when, what, where. So if you could go back to your initial implementation of MTSS, what would you do differently with professional development or resources for your staff?
I think if I could have a time machine, I think that we would slow down that just initial phase where you haven't really started training a lot of people yet. You're working with that core district group to really look at what MTSS is, how it's going to work in your district related to the data that you have specifically. And then Dr. Naylor kind of touched on this in her session, just looking at implementation science and really taking that process of planning down really slowly and being very intentional with it. In the creation of our handbook, I think that was a huge plus for us, building that handbook along with Branching Minds, because a lot of us at that point, even at the district level, didn't have a solid grasp on MTSS yet. So I think slowing that process down even more and pulling those important people in to ensure that that core understanding at the district level of what it is, what are we going to use it for, and how is it going to work for us, I think would be a very important step. We were pretty intentional, but I think I would slow that down even more and be even more intentional with that. And then within that phase of implementation, I think one of the main pieces that I really regret kind of skipping over is master scheduling. And I've heard so many people mention how important it is, because if you don't plan for the time, you don't have the time. So that's something we're kind of foraying into at this point. But I think if we would have tackled that in the beginning, that would have been a huge bonus for us. And then again, when we made the handbook, we did do some cross-department collaboration. But I think going back, I would have stepped into that even more so that everyone understands where they fit in under the umbrella of MTSS. Because that, again, is something that we're kind of learning on the fly and doing a lot of collaboration, like as things come up. But I think if we would have been more intentional in the beginning of this is how every department fits together, I think that would have been a big benefit for us. Um, Another thing that I wish we would have looked at during that handbook creation was resource alignment. And I think we talked about it and everyone was very impressed of how many resources we have. But I think looking at the alignment of those resources, that's something in year 2, we're just starting to realize, okay, we need to take a step back on this and look at possibly trying to align across grades, using those same resources and products so that as you're looking at that data across time for a student, you have a real solid measurement. Because sometimes we have a resource for elementary, we have a resource for middle school, and then we have another resource for high school. And it becomes really difficult to have that continuity of data as those students are traveling from grade to grade. So I think that would be our 3 big ones that if I could do over, we would focus a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I'm seeing a big theme, several questions coming up about, yes, but how do I make it happen with limited staff? So I'm wondering if any of you can touch on that. There's only limited people, limited resources, but specifically with staff, if you all can share thoughts about how people can make this happen.
I did want to say I'm really a little bit jealous of those districts that have the interventionist because we are a district that even though we're huge, we are really limited on staff. And so a lot of it does fall to the teachers. So that's something that I've been really listening to today as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what a lot of our friends are feeling as well. Any learnings? Anybody experience that? Well, Emma, you're facing that right now. How are you making it happen with just your teachers?
We're being really careful what we implement. We're going very slowly on purpose with the teachers. So starting basically just with that piece of let's look at our tier 2 and tier 3 and be sure there's an intervention plan in place. And so since the teachers are having to do that themselves, that's really kind of our big one step for the school year is let's be comfortable with being sure we have those students covered with a plan who need it. So it's the lack of that interventionist has caused us to be really mindful of the stress levels of the teachers and the time that they have, because if you throw too much out at once, it's a very negative reaction and people are turned off by the whole process. So really slowing down and piecemealing it as slowly as we can has become really important.
In listening to Emma, we're fortunate in District 145, we have an interventionist at each of our elementary schools. If we didn't, listening, I think 2 things would be really important to attend to. One is that time for intervention. So as Shannon said, they created that specific time in the schedule. So there's a distinction between this is core instruction time, this is time for additional support. The other thing that even if you have an interventionist, you have to continuously remind people, and this I addressed this in my introduction. Additional support time or intervention time is not just more core time. And so we shouldn't be planning you can't try during additional support to plan a lesson that's going to hit multiple skills. And so a rule of thumb that I always will say to teachers is if you're spending more time worrying and planning your win time or your intervention time, that's out of whack. Only the intervention should be doing that. You should be spending more of your time planning core instruction. And so really attending intentionally to that distinction. And if you have the materials, so then making sure that those materials are there, it's targeting one skill, and there's that distinction between the 2. That would be some recommendations I would make if teachers are delivering the interventions as well.
And just to piggyback off that, we have this quote we say in our district: you cannot intervene your way out of a tier one problem. So we have to make sure we are providing quality tier one instruction. Then we won't have to do as much intervening. And if you have that embedded time, one thing that we do in our district, even though we do have the interventionist, is if everybody's intervening at the same time, you have an intervention block. We use our data and just our knowledge of our teacher strengths to mix up class sizes. So if we have our classes, so if you have an hour and you know you have a teacher that's particularly strong in intervening or has a skill set, maybe they've been Letters trained or Wilson's trained or whatever, they have that group of kids. So they take the lower group of kids to somebody that's better at enriching, or somebody that's, whatever their strengths are, you play to that. So that way everybody isn't making 3 or 4 intervention lessons. They're just making one intervention lesson that takes the strain off of it, and you can mix up the classes to provide those interventions.
Thank you. Thank you. Somebody, can one of you touch on specifics of how and when to be slow and intentional, but not the specific when and how? And Emma, you touched on the challenge of time in your scheduling, but when and how are student plans happening in some of your settings?
Absolutely. So we did a gradual release. We have MTSS coordinators for the campuses. We trained them on getting the teachers to, document those intervention plans. And then they did kind of a campus turnaround training for the teachers. We let that marinate a little bit and just kind of see what results we got from that. And then we started to see just within our data where the bigger need for support was, which campuses were really taking it and running with it, which campuses hadn't even started anything yet. And then we were able to kind of prioritize where we needed to push in as a district MTSS team to provide extra support to the campus. So then the next step for us was to schedule time on each. Right now we're focused at elementary, on each elementary campus, to stay there the whole day, catch every teacher during their PLC. And then just allow that, that conversation to happen to where we kind of give an overview of the process, and then allowing them to question and, clear up any misunderstandings. And then that facilitation of like, let's look at that plan together and see exactly how we do it. And even just within that one PLC time, we had time to do all of that. And in a lot of them, every teacher was able to walk out the door with those plans in place for all tier 2 and tier 3 students. So that has been very powerful for us. So now we're saying, okay, that's been great at elementary. We're going to tackle that secondary next. That's a little more challenging, but we're getting there with them.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, Emma, maybe just one last question here for you of how do you ensure that the MTSS implementation is consistent across classrooms and grade levels?
Absolutely. Again, I think that PLC time and pushing in and speaking with teachers and being sure, there's that quality delivery, there's a solid plan in place, and they're comfortable with the resources and what they really should narrow their focus down on those resources. The fidelity really comes into play and is very important when you're talking about what is that main intervention resource. So that was a huge topic for us, just being sure that out of all the resources that are out there, let's focus and align with what our main intervention resource is. And then the other thing for us is, again, just starting to focus on that protected intervention time and being sure that there's understanding of what should be seen, there's eyes on the process, and there's a lot of communication and collaboration for it.
Thank you so much, Emma. So much to learn from all three of you, Angie, Emma, and Shannon. Thank you for your time.
Yes, thank you to our panelists for all your insight and your wisdom. And thank you, Katya, for asking the tough questions about the reality of implementing MTSS. And to our educators, if no one's told you today, thank you for all your hard work. Thanks for listening to Schoolin' Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds. Go ahead and subscribe to our feed wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, if you are enjoying our content, would you do us a favor and rate and review our podcast on iTunes? This helps others find our podcast and lets us know how much you love what we're creating. Branching Minds is an educational technology company using learning sciences and technology to help districts effectively personalize learning through MTSS. To learn more about us, check out our website, branchingminds.com, or follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn @Branching Minds.